big thanks to all our sponsors: Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website skipsandbins.com, easy contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks again to Mr. Vicky's Sauces, handmade in Cumbria. If you'd like to order some, then give them a call on 01768 210 102. Go to the website mrvickys.co.uk or drop them an email, info@mrvickys.co.uk. A big thanks to United Group Travel. They're a family firm based in Morpeth with pickups throughout the northeast. No strangers on our tours, just people you haven't met yet. They've got a presence on Facebook and a website, unitedgrouptravel.com. If you want to make a booking, give them a call on 01670 632 460 or mobiles 0791 666 4174 0795 71 41654. Thanks to Darren Baldwin Funerals, independent funeral directors. Let us look after you in your time of need. They're based on Old Durham Road in Gateshead, and you can contact them at their website, darrenbaldwinfunerals.co.uk. Email darren@darrenbaldwinfunerals.co.uk or give them a call, 0191 478 2730. A big thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the technical side of things. And a big thanks to New Workwear. You can find them at newworkwear.com. If you want to help the channel, hit the thumb up to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and share to your other social media. You can also pay a one-off fee of £25 to get a scarf, a cup, a pen, and a membership card. Go to the website, nufcmatters.com, and click membership, or put your smartphone over this QR code. We also support the food bank on this channel. If you want to make some donations virtually, go to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk and make a donation today. We're also a podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and other podcast providers. Just search NUFC Matters. I'm also a part of the Northeast Footy Brekkie Show. You can listen to that Monday to Friday, 7 till 9 at the tooneuk.com. We've also got an event coming up next year. It's in January the 19th at the Tyneside Irish Centre. It's an evening with Nobby Solano. Tickets are available on voucher for £20. Don't forget, Supermac and Gibbo do every pre-match at Louis Liquor Store. It's free entry, children welcome, and there is great food by Fed's Fried Chicken. They're usually on pre-match and sometimes post-match at Louis Liquor Store.
We still do 7 NUFC Matters show a week for free. But if you want to help support NUFC Matters, then there are a few ways of doing it. Hit the like button on each live broadcast and video. This helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button and select the all notifications bell so you don't miss a single show. If you want to help us financially, then you can join the channel using this button with the membership starting at $1.99 a month. Or you can drop us a donation in the chat using a super sticker. We're also looking for sponsors. If you'd like your brand advertised on the flyers for the show and featured during the ad break, then email john@nufcmatters.com to arrange today.
Attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again, but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you.
Good afternoon. Welcome along to nufc Matters with me, Steve Bray. There's Eddie Howe's press conference review for the Carabao Cup quarter-final game, which, of course, is away tomorrow night at Chelsea. And only a short press conference again for a cup competition, just over 20 minutes. Matthew Raisbeck from Radio Newcastle was in at the start, and he was asking about Fabian Schär and Joe Linton, who obviously came off injured in the win against Fulham at the weekend. Eddie was reluctant to say much about it. He just said that they both needed scans, but he didn't think that there were two serious injuries. So hopefully that is a bit of good news for us on the injury front. He then moved on to Botman. Razor asked him about Botman coming on. He only played a few minutes, but is it too early to start Botman moving forward? Maybe even tomorrow night's game. He was full of praise for his recovery. He said that Sven had done a lot of work. He'd rehabbed really well. He's got a load behind him. He will have benefited from making that appearance at St James's on Saturday, and he will make a decision on Sven. So didn't rule it out that possibly there could be a starting berth for Sven Botman tomorrow night. Also asked about Trippier. Said obviously he had a suspension. You mentioned he's had a couple of knocks as well, which he's recovering from. Will he be in the squad? Didn't really seem to be too concerned about Trippier. Yes, he said we hope so. Yes. So obviously we've got another training session today. I'll sit down and have a chat with him as well, see how things are from his point of view, but not expecting any problems. He then moved on to Elliot Anderson and Matt Targett, two long-term injuries, of course, asking for an update on them. He clarified that Elliot Anderson has now been to see another specialist, but that the specialist who he'd been to see gave him the same opinion as the specialist previous. So, he was happy enough with that decision. Clearly just had to go through what the injury is again, which is a stress injury to the back. It is healing, but it's healing slowly. And as for Matt Targett, he said, well, it was a straightforward operation on his hamstring. And he is sticking to the guidelines and following the recovery program that he is on. So no change there with Matt Targett. He then moved on to cup draws, Razor. He says you've already beaten two big teams in this competition. Obviously, Manchester United away. Manchester City, of course, we beat them as well. You're going to have to do it the hard way. You're away again. And Eddie agreed. He said, yeah, look, City and Manchester United away. Difficult games, but we got through. He said that the beauty is that we've showed we can raise our game against big teams in competitions, and we're very, very determined to progress in this cup competition. So gives you a big boost when you hear the gaffer talking like that. Does last year give you extra motivation, fuel in the tank? The fact that you got to the final of the Carabao Cup, Razor asked. And Eddie agreed. He mentioned Europe as well, said basically, the European adventure had given us a bond with the competition. Similarly, last season with the Carabao Cup, getting to the final. And he said the semi was really special. The final was disappointing, but the spectacle on whole last year, the Carabao Cup, it was a great experience. And if we get through, would love to hope we could get there and do it all again. Is this cup competition and this game in particular more important now that you're out of Europe? Eddie said he didn't know if it took on more meaning, but ultimately it's another game. It's a big game, and Chelsea are a good team. He always praises the opposition. Chelsea are a good team. They're vastly experienced, got a very good manager, and he says I expect both teams to be motivated with an eye on progressing tomorrow night. Keith Downey was next. He said how important was the win over Fulham at the weekend. He agreed that it was very important, and he said you don't want to go too many games without a win. It's important for your mentality and to refocus after you've lost games. He said, I can't praise the players enough for their ability to stay focused after the European exit. Keith then went back on about Sven Botman, pointing out the fact that when Sven Botman came onto the pitch, how he was welcomed by the players. Did it feel like a real shot in the arm, Keith asked. And he said, yeah, I mean, it was nice to see. He says, but I would say that all the players are popular with each other. He says there's a camaraderie in the squad. The players rate Sven Botman really highly. He gives confidence to those around him in the way that he plays, in the way that he passes. He's a big guy and he's a big character and he's been a big miss. does that sum up your look when you brought Sven on, but Fabian had already gone off? Has that like summed up your season? Keith was asking, and he says, "Look, I'll let you say that." He says, "But when things like that happen in game time, he says you're in game mode, and he says, we just say, right, he's got to come off, he's got to go on, we reshuffle." He says it's not until the dust settles that you go into it deeper. But he says, look, Fabian Schär has done very, very well for us, especially during this period where we've been, behest with injuries. He says, and hopefully it won't be too long, before he comes back. So yeah, disappointing for him, I guess, on the whole situation with Sven, but agreeing with Keith there, I think. Keith then said, did I miss the answer about Alexander Isak and from Razor? And of course, Razor hadn't asked him about that. Eddie said, no, he didn't ask the question about Isak. And everybody in the press room laughed, obviously intimating that Razor hadn't done his job properly. So then Keith just said, well, how is he? He said, look, Isak's got a groin problem. It's a similar one that he's already had. He had a scan last week. It just looks like minor fatigue, but we're treating him very, very carefully. Will he play tomorrow? He's got a chance, said Eddie. Last season, Keith looked at then. You went on that wonderful run to Wembley. Is there any one moment that stands out? He said, I wouldn't say there was a moment that stood out. He says, if you're forced to pick one, I would say the semi-finals. They were very special. He says, the game at Southampton, and just seeing our fans celebrating down at the ground, and the general feeling around the semi-finals and the goals. Says, unfortunately for us, the dream didn't turn into reality at Wembley. Maybe this year. Let's hope so, Eddie. Dawn Thulis was next from the BBC. She said, has fatigue played its part in the injury with Fabian Schär and Joe Linton? He agreed, I guess, with Dawn. He said, look, it's going to play a part. We haven't had the options to rotate the squads. But he said it's difficult to say why things do and don't happen like that. So didn't commit 100% to it, but could get where Dawn was coming from. Are you going to be more pragmatic in this Chelsea Cup game, because of the situation that you've got with players, and maybe focus more on the league games? Eddie just said, no, we won't. He says, we don't look at it like that. He says, we'll play the best team that's available to win the game. Then she mentioned Lewis Miley, and just asked, how's he been since Saturday? Have you had time to speak to him, etc.? And how excited is he? After Saturday, and he just said it's a little bit early. I haven't seen the players yet. He says, but looking back on Saturday, it was a great goal that he scored. It was a great moment for him. He says, what really impresses me about him is, he did his interview on TV with some of the senior players, and how calm he is, with the players around him and in front of the media. He says, I've got no doubt that he's very emotional inside, but it's a huge strength to be able to keep something like that internally. So yeah, high praise for Miley indeed. Dawn then mentioned that he was a record breaker, obviously youngest player to score in the Premier League now for Newcastle, and that was that really on Miley. Lee Ryder was next. Is this the best chance of winning something, the Carabao Cup? Eddie said, yeah. You could probably say that at the moment. Lee had asked this question a few months back. He said, because we're in the more advanced stages, he says it takes on big importance. He says it's another away game that we want to do well in. We did well in the last round against Manchester United, and we're looking to do the same again. Lee then pointed to the league position. Newcastle still in 6th place, as the Premier League table shows. With everything that's gone on, you must be chuffed, he said. And Eddie agreed. He just said, with all that's gone on, players have been resilient and consistent, finding ways to cope with difficult situations. And he says, the one thing I'm happy about is I've not seen a game where there's been a lack of effort. Lee then mentioned Emil Kraft. He called him an unsung hero. And Eddie said, I don't know if that's the right terminology. He says, but he certainly hasn't let me down since he's come back. And he was coming back from a very difficult injury. He works in an unfussy way. He looks good physically. He's given a great performance at the weekend, and his speed is key. He's not lost that, and that's a good asset for him to have. Dominic was next, and he was asking about those players who were injured. Is it too much to expect those players who were injured and who've come back to play 2 games in such close proximity? He just said, look, when you play high level games and high level opposition, it's going to take its toll, but the players are fit and raring to go, and I have no doubt that they'll be able to get us through these games. Dominic also mentioned the fact that we are playing the high level opposition. Does that take its toll more on players? And he said, look, I get the question. He says, but games being intense goes without saying. He says, the more pressure, the more intensity. He says not being able to rotate the players has probably caught up with us at different times, but as always, Eddie doesn't want to make an excuse of it. Craig Hope was next from the Daily Mail. He pointed out that Newcastle had, were joint top of a mini league on home form, but on away form they were 5 points and just above the bottom 3. Why is that? Eddie said if I had one answer, then we would have solved it. There's not one specific point, but he says saying that, from our perspective, when you look at away games collectively, we almost got a shock win in PSG. We beat Manchester United away. He says, I believe that our away form in the league will even itself out. He says, I don't doubt our character for 1 minute. He says, we're up for the fight. We're resilient. He says, but we're not consistent. He says, and that's what we need to rectify. Craig then asked him about, basically the cup game. Would he play his strongest team like he did in the later rounds of the Carabao Cup? Eddie said, look, I always find it hard to answer that. He says, we've got several versions of our strongest team. He says, what I'll tell you now is for tomorrow's game, we will pick our strongest team and we will pick a team to go out there and win. Craig then asked him about Harvey Barnes. Any more news? He just said, no, there's no more updates from what I told you the other day. It's still going to be 4 to 5 weeks with this new recovery program. Chris was next talking about Miggy and the goal that he scored. He said he looked relieved, and a few of the players said he was relieved. It was a relief for him to get that goal because he hadn't scored in a few games. And Eddie basically just said, look, every player loves to score. He's no different. He's had chances in every game. Everton, Spurs, for example. But his general performance has been good. It's been productive in many ways. There's no worries on my score about him as a player. Every player needs goals. And that goal will have done him the world of good, but I'm pleased for him. He was then asked again by Chris. He said, January's getting closer. Are you any closer to know what kind of players you're going for? He says, when I was talking about knowing where I was going to be at, he says, I was looking at December the 31st. He says, and that's miles away. So everybody was laughing at that. Jordan Cronin was next. He says, it's your 100th game tomorrow night. Has it flown or has it dragged? Eddie said, look, Lee Marshall told me it was my 100th game. He says, it's a great stat. He says, it's flown by. I've loved every second. And he said, there's been some highlights. There's been some memories. And I'm proud to have been on this journey. Lee Marshall then chipped in and thanked Mark Hannon for the stat. What do you hope to achieve in the next 100 games? He said, well, you've set me up for predictable cliches here. He says, but if players do the same, I'll take what comes. He says, I'm looking for the team to be the epitome of what we work towards. He says, but I will say that I'm very proud to lead this team. Louise Taylor was next. She pointed out the fixture list in January included Liverpool, City, Villa, Sunderland. And she went, bearing in mind these fixtures, is this not a cup you want to be out of? And Eddie said, absolutely not. He says, we won games, we won competition, and we want to get to the end of these competitions and where the trophies are decided. And he says, January looks a fun month. I can't wait. She then mentioned cup draws. Was it? No, sorry. It was Martin Hardy who asked the last question about cup draws. And he mentioned the fact that we'd had such, big games like PSG, Dortmund, AC Milan, like the group of death. We'd had Man City, Man United. Now we've got Chelsea. What's your thought on those cup draws collectively? And he said, well, look, coming on from the last question that I had there, he says that, I have no regrets about these cup games. He says, playing the big teams is forcing us to improve. And we need to be exposed to those kind of games if we are going to improve. Simon Bird had the last question. He asked if the players were going to have a Christmas party. And he went, I hope not. He says, there's too many big games over this festive period for a party. That was it. Short but sweet. Good press conference. Big shout out to everybody in the chat. Hi, Nick. Hi, Steve. And hi, Trolls. Hope everybody is well. Hopefully Chelsea will win, he says. I forgot that was your team. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. I am back at 6 o'clock tonight, and I will be back with the fans forum. Set a reminder. If you haven't already joined the channel, please do make a little donation or subscribe, which is free. Just hit the subscribe button. Take care. See you at 6 o'clock tonight.